A warm welcome from Amsterdam, and thanks for tuning in to a new episode of Game Consultant. Your host of today is Reinout.
It is Sunday, May the 24th. Welcome to Game Consultant, and starting off with Chris. Chris Reed had Career Fest a whole week. He was actually busy doing all kinds of interviews, and on Friday I joined his panel, Emerging Tech in Gaming, and we talked about what the definition is for me, and I actually did discuss and told my vision, and it's all about human capital. It goes back actually to what Kate Edwards was saying a few episodes ago. The people are important, and that's exactly what I was actually describing during the panel, where I basically said it's the people that drive innovations, and that actually leads to emerging tech. So on the blog I have a link to an hour of an interesting panel, and funny enough, someone mentioned I was 29 and a half years old. That's, hey, really happy. Anyways, today I have Alli, and he's from Iceland, has moved about 8 years ago to the US. He's a venture partner of Makers Fund and an investor himself. And we talked more about himself, how is he looking at gaming, how is he looking at COVID, these kind of things, and well, pitch decks. How should you actually create a pitch deck, and how is he looking at pitch decks? So that interview, and then funny enough, Joachim also has a very interesting item, and that's actually the perfect pitch deck for gaming studios. So all in all, I think a fun episode. Got some people that said, hey, sometimes it's a little bit too long, so then we have to listen it in 2-3 parts. So I'm trying to keep it shorter today and see if that works. And if I have very long interviews the next time, thank you, Oliver, for your advice. I'm going to cut them in 2, and then you can listen it over 2 episodes. Because I know you all are busy, and, well, talking about keeping it short, let's continue. So today, as I said, Chris normally is discussing and rethinks all the stuff about esports, but you know, he had an extreme heavy week, so we decided to do his item on Wednesday. But Joachim, I think you got something very interesting. Let's do this.
Thanks, Reinout. Hi, it's Joachim Mackren from Elite Game Developers here. You might have heard me on previous podcasts of Reinouts, and in these snippets I want to cover the newsletter that we send out every week, the Elite Game Developers News. So we sent out one on Friday where we were covering topics from this week, and one of the most interesting ones was Ilya's deck that he shared on LinkedIn on the perfect games company pitch deck. So he shared that on LinkedIn because he wanted to give out some kind of like good template for startups to see what is useful, what kind of information you should have. So I wanted to, in this week's newsletter, highlight all the different slides from Ilya's deck, like how do you bring up the founders, how do you talk about the team and the hiring plan, your titles, what's coming up next, the new game, a competitor analysis. I think this was probably the most important slide of the whole deck, which was the competitor analysis bit. You can check it out if you go to elitegamedevelopers.com/blog, and you can find this week's newsletter there under EGD News, and the number is 30, which was the 30th email that we've sent out. And this week we also did a few webinars. So we had the recording from Sophie Wu's webinar on working from home coming out. You can look up the video there. And also we had a webinar with Nick Murray on long-term engagement in hybrid casual games, if you think about games like Archero. So check out that video. We had a really interesting discussion there. And also we put out a blog article this week on how do you pitch investors over video calls, which is a totally new format. You can't really go to conferences anymore and meet up with investors because you need to embrace the new format that's coming up now. And also we had an interesting podcast on the Elite Game Developers podcast this week on looking inside the gaming VC's brain. We cover different topics there, so listen to that episode to know more. And that's it for this week, guys. Stay safe and stay well.
Thanks, Joachim, and interesting as always. And happy birthday for your missus. Enjoy the Sunday. So now we're continuing with the interview. Alli, as they call him, all about investing in games. So sit down, relax, and listen to what he has to say. Some very interesting thoughts, and man, oh man, this man has really built up a CV. Just listen. Hope you enjoy it. Today, an interview, and as you all know, I always have the challenge. I'm getting people from all across the world, and today it's someone originally from Iceland. So the first name, I actually do get it. It's Alli. And then we're going to go to the last name, Óttarsson. And I came close, I hope. So Alli is a venture partner with Makers Fund, and as you already know, it's an interesting time for gaming and funding. We have actually addressed it in the beginning of where COVID started. Lots of people that were out fundraising suddenly saw lots of declines, or let's take it over, pick it up on 5-6 weeks, which, well, it has already been almost 3 months. So today we actually wanted to know a little bit more about how it is investing in gaming, pitch decks, how should you address the vision, the mission of a company. How do investors actually like to be approached? The cold calling versus get the right intro, all these kind of things. But first of all, welcome, Alli, in my podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah. Could you say a little bit more about your background and actually, you moved from Iceland to the US now.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So just to get the name part out of the way. So my full name is actually Aðalsteinn Óttarsson, and so nobody can pronounce that. So I go by Alli, which is the nickname that I had growing up in the hill borough of Reykjavik, Iceland.
Reykjavik. That I can say.
Yes. Yeah. And so I cut my teeth in the gaming industry for a company called CCP, which is in Iceland. CCP, they are the makers of EVE Online. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the original team that launched EVE in 2003, which is a while back. They celebrated the 17th birthday of EVE earlier this year, and after launch we had kind of moderate success with the game, and were able to grow the company a little bit. And I was originally a programmer, and but not a very good one, and so as we grew, I hired a good friend of mine into the company to help me with some of the programming that I had been doing. And after about 2 weeks, he put his hand on my shoulder and looked me very deeply in the eyes and said, "Alli, you have to stop programming. You're making it worse." And
honest.
Yes.
Nice.
And so I did, and that was very good advice. And I started focused just more on management and leadership. I did project and program management within our kind of like engineering department, and then I led the transition for the company to cross-functional, agile, and Scrum type of activities in 2008 to 9. And then the company grew even further. We had offices established in the US, in China, and in the UK. And my role became very focused around not only production within Eve, but across the company as a whole. And then around the same time, in 2009, League of Legends came out, and shortly thereafter, I started meeting people from Riot at events and conferences. And we engaged in kind of like knowledge sharing and practices. And at that time, there weren't many companies that were doing free to play, direct to consumer. It was basically just CCP, Wargaming, and Riot, I think, for a while. And so we had some back and forth over a couple of years, and then ultimately the conversation turned to me joining Riot and moving to Los Angeles, which I ultimately did in 2012.
Yeah.
And then I worked on League of Legends as the development director on League, and built up a team of development managers and development directors that were in charge of that for both League and other game endeavors at Riot. And alongside that, started to do my first, second, and third kind of like angel investments in video games. And the first investment that I did was actually this same friend who had originally told me to stop programming. He went out and founded a company in Berlin as the CTO. And after they'd been going at it for a while, I mustered the courage to invest in them a little bit, and that has been going well for them, and the company has flourished and taken subsequent investment from very impressive investors, but then I got kind of like the bug, the appetite for this activity. It's really engaging and rewarding to do the combo of investing and advising. And since then, I've been slowly but surely kind of like building my personal angel investment portfolio. And many of those companies I advise either formally or informally. And then last year I decided to just do that more full time. And today I'm solely focused on startups, startup investing, angel investing, and advising. And then I more recently have picked up a role with Makers Fund, which, for those who know, Makers Fund is a gaming or entertainment. Interactive entertainment focused fund that predominantly invests in gaming or gaming related endeavors as a venture partner.
Yeah. So that is actually they quote unquote use you to have the eyes and ears in the market.
Yeah, so I basically, for them, I do three things. I help with sourcing, both here locally in the States and also through my network. I help with the due diligence process and engage with companies as we are going through those types of activities. And then for companies that we invest in, I also do help the companies in our portfolio with portfolio support, selective companies, of course, because makers have invested in quite a lot of companies in the few years that they've been out.
Yeah, that's nicely said. Starting off with a really interesting question. Have you ever got a pitch deck where you wondered, like, no, and eventually invested?
Yes.
The reason why
Yeah.
I ask is like people always talk about the perfect pitch deck.
Yeah.
I don't believe in it. I mean,
Yes.
I believe that you write something from the heart, and I personally rather see pitch decks that don't have the right design or whatsoever, but what the contents.
Yeah. So,
and you read it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, it's not really like, you get a pitch deck and it's like, and your response is I often get approached with pitch decks that are intentionally in the shape, and like, and the request is more, hey, can you help me with this pitch deck? And that's how I start to engage with founders, and in at least 2 of those cases, I've ended up making a personal investment as well.
Yeah. So bottom line, the contents do get your interest, and then through that, you're basically diving in deeper and get to learn the people, the product. Yes. Eventually get a deck out of that is basically quote unquote your own deck. But then you believe. Yeah,
but I think pitch decks are still important, right? And so I do get across a handful of not great pitch decks, and the reason that they're important is just like you really want to limit the reasons for investors to say no. You just need to take as many reasons off the table, and a bad pitch deck is one of the first reasons just to say no, right? So therefore, having you don't need to get to the perfect pitch deck, but you certainly can't have just a rubbish one either.
Yeah. What kind of tips would you have then? I mean, if you see pitch decks all over the place, and obviously it starts with the founders, and it ends with the amount of money they're looking for. But ideally, what would you like to learn initially from someone that is raising money?
Yeah, I think the most kind of like missed attribute are 2 things. It's being very clear on how your game or product is going to differentiate. In especially for games, there are just a lot of offerings in most genres, and if you're not crisp on the differentiating factors, that can be a detractor. And then the second thing is just having some clarity around your kind of like where you are in terms of fundraising and what your fundraising strategy is going forward. And sometimes you have to kind of like go through 3 or 4 slides to kind of like attach the goal, the roadmap, and the fundraising kind of like approach, and making those things succinct and come together is certainly helpful.
Yeah, because I mean, funding. I mean that's in a way people start to have a party when they've raised it, but effectively the work starts then. I mean, you just got a pile of money, and someone expects that you return. What are the expectations actually if let's say you would invest $500K in a company? What is the expectation from an early investor?
So I think that depends on a lot of different factors, but I think in venture, all of the investments that are taking in a kind of like portfolio approach, like each investment needs to have some sort of outsized potential, and so. So 500, I mean, it's hard to say for 500K. It depends if it's like, on what stage it is per se. But expectations are high. And so, and that's why only, a handful of companies that do get looked at do get invested in.
Yeah. Because for an angel investor, it's different than for a Series A or a Series B. Right. But is there sort of a formula to it for people to keep an eye on? Because they always say like, hey, don't put your valuation too high in the beginning, because otherwise it might be difficult later on to raise for a normal value. And I hear a lot of investors say, well, the money that you're going to make, or the paper money that you're going to make, is really in Series A, Series B, and later. I mean, look at the absolute amount of money that you're worth instead of percentage. I mean, but are there formulas that you guys keep in mind when you invest in terms of return?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that they're formulas, but they're certainly benchmarks or comparables. But if I were to give advice to founders, I would not necessarily focus too much on that from the get-go, but also be open to just engaging in that with your investors, right? And so, and in recent years, especially in gaming, the landscape has been very founder-friendly, and all of the investors that are focused on games are more than I think that they also see that in their interest to just really work on the current and future fundraising with their founders, and if you come in a bit off in that, don't necessarily dig too deep into those things, so just be open to collaborate on that.
Yeah, get the money and start building the company further.
Yes.
And and then 220. I mean, as I expected, it was going to be an interesting year. A couple of episodes ago, I had Sergey, who has as a hobby to keep track of all the M&A stuff, and so Q1 was a good year. I had Richard from Edison Group, European Video Games, also looks bright. But they also said, well, when we launched the reports, that was just before COVID hit us. So what can we expect this year? Valuations under pressure, less investments? What is your take on that?
So I think that will come naturally in terms of, or speaking to the valuations under pressure. I think that across gaming, from what I see is that there's still a lot of activity, and even though that there's some like pullback, many of the funds and players in the space are still investing and taking calls and making deals. And so I said earlier that the landscape has been very founder friendly. I think that will reduce a little bit. I think investors know that they have a little bit more leverage, and there is not kind of like as much frenzy, which might I would say put pressures on valuations, but also just keep more sanity around valuations, because certainly there have been deals that we've seen that do go very high, and so but I think ultimately it will also result in a dampening, or there will be less investments because there's just people are taking it a little bit more carefully. But in terms of the ecosystem, many of the gaming funds, and that's certainly true for ours, is that they're heavily invested in by gaming entities or people or entities within the gaming space, and so that is all going pretty good so far under COVID, and so there's no kind of like immediate pullback or things like that we're seeing.
Yeah. So that is more on the investment side. I mean, we saw some quite interesting M&A transactions in Q1. So same for that. For now, we're just going to live through 220, people holding the cash in the companies, and maybe 221 when it's opening up again.
Yeah, I think we're still like in an area where there is a console refresh and platforms are being built, and large tech conglomerate are making larger plays in gaming. I think all of them. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do continue to see M&A activities this year that are fueled just by that demand on those vectors.
Yeah. So companies like Tencent might still be going out there because they need to keep on growing. I mean, what's your take on Tencent in general? I mean, they seem to be a buying force in this industry. I mean, they really have quite a hefty position, I would say.
Yes, they do have a hefty position for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, things seem to be going good for Tencent, and they are seeing good results from COVID. They're seeing good results, kind of like as China is getting back on track. I think just generally what 2020 is going to do for the industry is that it is attracting more people to gaming during COVID for such an extended period of time that it is going to alter or have an impact on people's behavioral patterns for the long term. And I think that is going to be positive for the gaming sector as a whole. And I think Tencent having a very strong position across most, almost every fathomable type of content that is out there certainly has them in a great position.
Strange question, maybe. So here in Europe, we give lots of penalties. Not that I agree to it, but Google is getting penalized. Microsoft, whenever there is monopoly, or if they can sort of prove it that there's a monopoly. Do you think that Tencent right now, they can basically buy whatever they want in any country? If something pops up above the radar, there's always the name, the brand Tencent that might actually acquire it, or they're a stakeholder. So what point can they just go on with that? I mean, at one point, it's like everyone being attached one way to another to the company Tencent in gaming.
Yeah, so it's very hard for me to predict in that specific scenario, but I do think that we will continue to see more consolidation generally, and not only with Tencent, but in terms, like I said, there are large entities that are more and more interested in the gaming space, and so so I think there will continue to be consolidation in that sense, and I don't think Tencent will necessarily end up owning everything or being but I think
too dominant.
I think they will continue to be very dominant, but I can't really speculate on that specifically.
No, it's more like a question: when are they becoming too dominant? It's Tencent all over the place. They're minority shareholder, and then slowly growing. They take over companies. I mean, to what point is that healthy? I mean, should there be another company that is also involved, or more companies? But they seem to have very deep pockets. Yeah, it's speculation. I agree. Yeah. I'll leave you with
it.
Hey, and going back to yourself, I mean, if you look at the market, what are you searching for the ideal, or what is your sweet spot in terms of investments, the type of companies? And as a follow-up question, you just explained very well, like, okay, I see a pitch deck that obviously gives me a good reason to reach out to them if I'm interested, and then work with them intensively, get to learn them, upgrade, or make the presentation better, and then eventually I get to invest. What type of companies would that be that you're searching for in this market?
Yeah, so and again, reiterating that from my personal standpoint, obviously here is that the reason that I started doing this, is doing more of this, is because I really enjoy the combo of investing and advising. So I do have a special eye for like online multiplayer games because I feel that's where I can contribute the most and be the most helpful in. And so that doesn't mean that that's the only thing that I look at. I have personally invested in several mobile companies and some platform plays as well. And so, but multiplayer is certainly kind of like the things that I look the most on, and doesn't necessarily have to be PC first. I think there's a lot of kind of MMOs coming out right now. There's certainly an MMO resurgence in the startup space. Just out of Riot in the last 2 years, there are 3 companies that are out and well funded, making very compelling MMO plays. There are a lot of multiplayer games that are taking a more kind of like social aspect to their offering, more kind of like multiplayer PvE type things that are coming out that are very interesting. And you also see in things like Fortnite, where they now have more, they have Party Island that has more kind of like a social aspect to just like hanging out and being. And I think all of those things are very interested, and I do spend a lot of time just looking at MMO or multiplayer collaborative or multiplayer PvP or those types of things.
Yeah, got it. Hey, and as you invest, are you taking board seats, or are you more like, hey, I'm in the background. If you need me, I'm at arm's length. I can help you. I can introduce you.
Absolutely, certainly the latter, right? Like I said, I try to be as much of an enabler as I can, and be as helpful as I can when I engage with the companies that I'm.
Last question. Obviously you have been born in Europe and worked there, so you've seen the European landscape. You're now 8 years in the US, so the US landscape. I mean, do you see differences? And also concerning your investments, would there be then now more US bound, or are you still also looking at Europe?
Yes, so I certainly see differences in a lot of ways. I mean, and I think this is very well known and documented, that kind of like work culture in America is different than work culture in Europe, especially in kind of like the Northern European countries. And I would count Holland into that category as well. So it's. So that certainly is different. But in terms of, I actually enjoy this stance quite a bit from the investment standpoint, because I do get to straddle Europe and America quite a bit. And so having worked in games in Europe and relying on a very ever-growing network of past colleagues that are now all over the place in Europe. And then the same here, having worked in the States for 8 years and having a network of people who I've worked with at Riot that are now all over the place here in the US and elsewhere. That leaves me with a lot of kind of like nodes in those networks, and it's certainly something that I'm very keen on looking at things that are happening in Europe, things that are happening in the US. On the differences, I think valuations are certainly tougher in the US, especially here on the West Coast. You see companies that are coming out of the gate in kind of like pre-seed or seed stages that are raising both higher dollar values at higher evaluations than you would see in companies coming out of Europe. So that's certainly a differentiator.
Yeah. Still, the very last. Are you playing games yourself?
Absolutely.
What's your favorite now?
So right now I'm playing a lot of Valorant, which is a game that's out from Riot and is currently in beta. The most recent game that I played came out yesterday and is called Crucible, and is Amazon's first kind of like real play out of there. And so I'm only kind of like a couple of hours into it, so I'm not gonna speak to that specifically, right? But certainly those two hours have been enjoyable, so I'm going to keep playing. And but I do play a lot, and being in this position also allows you to I play a wider variety now than when I was working at CCP or when I was working at Riot. I think more notably, I play way more mobile games. I play more console games. There's way more variety. Whereas as before, I would be more focused on just like core PC games predominantly. The home front kind of like varies a bit in appreciation for the gaming activities, but it's nice to be able to say that like hey, it's for work. So and then and which is mostly true. So
Yeah, you cut me off on there because it was my next question. Like, okay, well, you have a good excuse, and no, but that's good. That's good. Well, I want to thank you. I mean, there are some very interesting tips for people, and for everyone that's listening, I'll have the link to the LinkedIn profile on my blog, so people, if they're interested, they can reach out or ask you questions. And for now, I want to thank you very much for your time and explanation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, likewise. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So great interview. Thanks, Alli, for joining me in this podcast. And I got some more investors lined up, so I'm not going to do that every week. Hey, one thing I wanted to mention, obviously Nordic is coming up this week, so I hope you all registered, and I might see you around somewhere in either panels or at the Discord channel, whatever. Hope you enjoy Nordic Game Online, I should say. So 27th, 28th, and 29th of May. On Tuesday, I actually have the Mobile Growth Association. They also have an event June the 4th. I'm talking to the CEO, Jen. So yeah, I mean, stay tuned and catch you on Wednesday. Ciao for now.
This was all for today. Thanks so much for listening to Game Consultant. Tune in next week for a brand new episode. And remember, do share this podcast with other members of the games industry.